It was January 24th in the year 1935 that canned beer made its debut. In partnership with the American Can Company, the Gottfried Krueger Brewing Company delivered 2,000 cans of Krueger's finest beer and Krueger's Cream Ale to faithful Krueger drinkers in Richmond, Virginia. 91% of the drinkers approved of the canned beer, driving Krueger to give the green light to further production. By the late 19th century, cans were instrumental in the mass distribution of foodstuffs, but it wasn't until 1909 that the American Can Company made its first attempt to can beer. This was unsuccessful, and the American Can Company would have to wait for the end of Prohibition in the United States before it tried again. Finally, in 1933, after 2 years of research, American Can developed a can that was pressurized and had a special coating to prevent the fizzy beer from chemically reacting with the tin. The concept of canned beer proved to be a hard sell, but Krueger overcame its initial reservations and became the first brewer to sell canned beer in our nation. The response was overwhelming. Within 3 months, over 80% of distributors were handling Krueger canned beer, and Krueger's was eating into the market share of the big three national brewers, Anheuser-Busch, Pabst, and Schlitz. Competitors soon followed suit, and by the end of 1935, over 200 million cans had been produced and sold. The purchase of cans, unlike bottles, did not require the consumer to pay a deposit. Cans were also easier to stack, more durable, and took less time to chill. As a result, their popularity continued to grow throughout the 1930s and then exploded during World War II when U.S. brewers shipped millions of cans of beer to soldiers overseas. After the war, national brewing companies began to take advantage of the mass distribution that cans made possible and were able to consolidate their power over the once dominant local breweries, which could not control costs and operations as efficiently as their national counterparts. Today, canned beer accounts for approximately half of the $20 billion U.S. beer industry. Not all of this comes from the big national brewers. Recently, there has been renewed interest in canning from microbrewers and high-end beer sellers who are now realizing that cans guarantee purity and taste by preventing light damage and oxidation. It was January 24th in the year 1965 that Sir Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill, the British leader who guided Great Britain and the Allies through the crisis of World War II, continued his eternity in London at the age of 90. Born at Blenheim Palace in 1874, Winston Churchill joined the British 4th Hussars upon his father's continuance of eternity in 1895. During the next 5 years, he enjoyed an illustrious military career, serving in India, the Sudan, and South Africa, and distinguishing himself several times in battle. In 1899, he resigned his commission to concentrate on his literary and political career, and in 1900 was elected to Parliament as a Conservative MP from Oldham. In 1904, he joined the Liberals, serving in a number of important posts before being appointed Britain's first Lord of Admiralty in 1911, where he worked to bring the British Navy to a readiness for the war that he foresaw. In 1915, the second year of the Great War, Churchill was held responsible for the disastrous Dardanelles and Gallipoli campaigns, and he was excluded from the war coalition government. He resigned and volunteered to command an infantry battalion in France. However, in 1917, he returned to politics as a cabinet member in the Liberal government of Lloyd George. From 1919 to 1921, he was Secretary of State for War, and in 1924, returned to the Conservative Party, where 2 years later he played a leading role in the defeat of the General Strike of 1926. Out of office from 1929 to 1939, Winston Churchill issued unheeded warnings of the threat of Nazi and Japanese aggression. After the outbreak of World War II in Europe, Churchill was called back to his post as First Lord of the Admiralty and 8 months later replaced the ineffectual Neville Chamberlain as Prime Minister of a new coalition government. In the first years of his administration, Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany, but Churchill promised his country and the world that the British people would never surrender. He rallied the British people to a resolute resistance and expertly orchestrated Franklin D. Roosevelt and Joseph Stalin into an alliance that crushed the Axis. In July of 1945, 10 weeks after Germany's defeat, his conservative government suffered a defeat against Clement Attlee's Labour Party, and Churchill resigned as Prime Minister. He became leader of the opposition and in 1951 was again elected Prime Minister. 2 years later, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature for his 6-volume historical study of World War II and for his political speeches. He was also knighted by Queen Elizabeth II. In 1955, he retired as Prime Minister, but remained in Parliament until 1964, the year before his continuance of paternity. It was January 24th in the year 2006 that Walt Disney announced the $7.4 billion purchase of Pixar. By the end of 2005, Pixar had become a giant in the world of movie animation. So on January 24th in 2006, the company that bought the world movies like Toy Story, A Bug's Life, Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, and The Incredibles was sold to the Walt Disney Company, their longtime distributor, for a staggering $7.4 billion. Since 1993, when Disney and Pixar signed their first 3-picture deal, Pixar films had won 19 Academy Awards and grossed more than $3 billion at the box office. Toy Story, the first animated film to be completely computer-generated, had set a new standard, blazing a trail that other companies had struggled to follow. In the same time period, Disney's own animation unit had released more traditional animated films that were either modest successes, such as Lilo and Stitch in 2002, or flops, such as Home on the Range in 2004. Its first completely computer-generated effort, Chicken Little in 2005, was profitable, but had nowhere near the successes of The Incredibles, which grossed $200 million domestically and won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature Film. Despite the success of the Pixar-Disney collaboration, Pixar CEO and Apple co-founder Steve Jobs had reportedly clashed with Disney's longtime chairman and CEO, Michael Eisner, and in January 2004, Jobs announced that Pixar would begin talks with other distributors. Roy Disney, the nephew of Walt Disney, subsequently led a shareholder revolt, and in the spring of 2004, Eisner received a 45% no-confidence vote from shareholders and was stripped of his chairmanship. Eisner announced he would step down as CEO in September of 2005, 1 year before his contract was set to expire. His replacement was the company's president, Robert A. Iger. One of Iger's first moves was to work on repairing the relationship with Pixar, whose latest contract with Disney was set to expire in June of 2006 with the delivery of its next film, Cars. Under the deal announced that January and formally completed on May 5th, Jobs would serve as director on Disney's board, while John Lasseter, a former Disney animator and the leading creative force behind Pixar films, would become chief operating officer of the animation studios, as well as the principal creative advisor at Walt Disney Imagineering. In a conscious effort by Pixar to maintain its unique creative process and non-traditional corporate culture, the two companies remain physically separate, with Pixar maintaining its headquarters in Emeryville, California, while Disney remains in its home of over 80 years in Burbank, California. The historic information divulged on this audio file can be verified on History.com.